OB, hi.
How are you?
Oh man, really happy you're here. Really nice to see you in person. Welcome to the Wonder Dome.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. I feel like I've been anticipating this since I first just check in and when I met you through our first call, it's just exciting to hear the connections we've had without
Yeah.
even really knowing each other before. So I'm just excited to really be here and speak with you.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I feel that. And I'm remembering like the reason we're here is because the powerhouse Anise Fisher said she emailed. This is the email. I'm gonna paraphrase it a bit, but I think this is pretty much what she said. She sent me an email and she said, "Hey, I was doing my like daily prayer, doing my like daily kind of connection with my sense of the divine and like just asking how I can be of service today. And the information I got was that I need to introduce OB to Andrew. I was like, what? That's fucking cool.
That's
like,
a super,
yeah,
super introduction.
yeah. I was like, there's no, I simply cannot argue with that. like, I'm gonna trust a niece. I'm gonna trust whatever that kind of divine energy, universal energy. I'm a bit of an agnostic. I'm a bit open to language, but for
Yeah.
her, I trust that that's like a deeply rooted, deeply sourced kind of way of connecting to life. So I was like, all right, let's
Wow.
talk.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, she is a powerhouse, man, and I'm glad she connected us. Off the top, I think she was right. It was a great connection. So I'm glad she followed, was obedient to what she heard.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, and so we've had now a couple chances to talk, and I'm noticing that like I'm like, there's all these different places I want to start. So maybe just let me take a moment to see what feels really important to start with. Yeah, this is like this is diving into the deep end, but you actually said this right before we started, and I was just like, oh yes. And you talked about like last time we spoke, there was this energy around like for you healing. You're an
Mm,
educator, you're a fashion designer, and
mm,
there's like a sense in which you are clearly someone who cares about creating both environments and clothing, artifacts, images that evoke something in people. So that's
yeah.
just like clear. But it wouldn't necessarily be obvious from someone looking from afar that inside of that is a deep commitment to healing, to like helping people
Mm,
heal.
wow.
And I love that. And what you said right before you started is that actually part of healing, or maybe a central part of healing, is giving ourselves the opportunity to really experience beauty, not to
Yeah.
just see beautiful things from afar and kind of like, oh, there's a beautiful person, there's a beautiful sunset, but to actually like experience beauty. It's like a
Yes.
feeling. And I was like,
Right.
that's truth. So maybe we could just start there. Like, what do you say more about what it means to you to feel beauty in you, or to experience beauty, and then how that's healing? What's healing about that?
Yeah. Man, I feel like just from the way I was raised, the way I was brought up, and I don't think it's for me alone, but I always feel like there's a connection. So there's a connection between us and humanity. We're all connected in some sort of way. And I feel like someone always has something for somebody else, even if we don't
Mm,
realize it in the moment. So, just growing and growing into who I am every day, I'm learning that everybody needs healing in a certain area, maybe multiple areas, but and we have many different areas in our life that require healing. We just don't use that language sometimes about healing. We would
mm,
rather call
mm.
it, well, I just struggle with this, but sometimes we don't want to claim it as an area for healing. And
Why do you think that is? What's up with that?
healing sounds like it sounds too broken.
Mm,
If we're not healed, it sounds too broken for people to grapple with.
mm,
And healing to me, it's a great thing. it's a great thing that we all should like internalize, but I think like people just find it hard to hear healing and not feel crazy. You
Mm,
know, it's like if I
mm.
say that I'm struggling in 4 or 5 different areas, um, someone may look at me like I don't have it all together, which we
Mm.
all don't have it all together.
I've literally never met someone who actually has it, whatever it is, all together.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
whatever they don't have all together that you think they do, they're just not. We have so much within us spiritually in our minds, in our bodies, that we couldn't possibly know
Mm,
what someone feels their struggle is, or what's happening with them.
mm,
So I really love to take the time to really actively listen to people. And I've done that in education, like working with students, working with teachers, working with the administration. I took a lot of time just listening to what people were saying, whether it was like being challenged, like teachers being challenged with uh, administration, or administration being challenged with teachers just doing what they want, or students being challenged with teachers, teachers being challenged with students, parents
mm,
being challenged with how teachers are teaching their kids. I'm able to hear everything and realize that in all of these situations, there was a need for healing in one way or another. And it just wasn't seen as healing. It was seen as somebody else is doing something to me, versus what is happening here and how can I show up differently, so that this doesn't become this perpetuating situation that
mm,
happens over and over and over again.
mm,
So
mm,
rather than take this opportunity to blame someone, I'll just listen. I'd listen and hear what is that pain point? What is that area that they're struggling with? Um, and part of that is because I'm a believer that respect is something that everyone deserves.
mm, mm,
So if everyone deserves respect, then that means that, and when I used to do this with my students, and I'd ask them, what does respect mean? And then one of the definitions, part of the definition of respect means that you find something you admire about a person.
mm,
So if you see any person, I think the first go-to is, what can I admire about this person? What have they done or accomplished that I haven't done? And that is
mm,
enough to respect that person on a level that we couldn't even imagine.
mm,
So it only takes one thing we admire. Like I can look at you, Andy, and say, you know what, this podcast, um, it's raw, it's raw, but it's also super authentic.
mm,
I have never done a podcast before.
mm,
I
mm,
can admire that about you, and that's enough for me to respect you. And no matter what you say, I'm gonna hold you to the highest esteem of this thing,
mm,
this podcast
mm.
you've done that I admire. I'm gonna see you from that lens every time. And if you don't stand up to that, that has nothing to do with me. You know what I
Mm,
mean? But I'm gonna
mm,
still continue to show you how I see you. And if you decide to recognize that eventually, that's the goal, of course, then I just help someone heal a little bit from what they were struggling with.
mm,
So,
mm.
it to me, it takes us really trying to heal ourselves from what we think about a person to seeing what we admire about them and moving according to that.
Mm. Yeah, one that's beautiful. And one thing I'm in touch with as you share that is there's a way in which the parts of us that are hurting, or the parts of us that are afraid, or the parts of us that want to look good or be right, or to be admired in a way, actually, like there's something paradoxical about, like, if you can actually just give someone admiration freely, without
Mm,
attachment, without
yes.
needing anything back, that's very different than like, I need you to admire me, right? Like there's
Right.
a so the parts of us that have these needs are superhuman, like supernatural, I mean, although maybe in some ways they're superhuman,
Right.
that's sort of where what we might call healing. And that doesn't mean we're broken,
Hmm.
but rather it means we haven't yet like taken in that truth fully, that we have a need for connection, or a need for love, or a need for,
Right.
and that actually shows up. I'm just in touch with, like you talked about, like teachers and students and parents and administrators, like what a freaking like melting pot of needs and wants and hopes and dreams. And those parts that have not yet been healed, to use your language, show up in the relationship. They show up in the way that, like, a teacher gets extra upset at a student who's supposedly like a misbehaving student, or a student gets extra upset when a teacher doesn't seem to understand who they really are, or like whatever that is. And so we see the like anger and the disappointment and the frustration. But all of those, I'm hearing you say, are actually just surface signs of like a deeper opportunity for these two people to help heal themselves more, so that they can see each other more clearly, and not just see like kind of what's not working, and feel the pain.
Right.
Is that
Right.
resonating with
Oh,
you?
that's absolutely right. And it's kind of like, I guess an example would be almost like if you got a tattoo. If you got a tattoo, it's painful at first.
Mm.
Um, every time you get a tattoo, they don't say scratch it. They say put on this ointment, you know, and something has to be applied in order for that healing process to take place.
Mm.
And naturally, yeah, I think over time we can heal. It can take longer if we don't apply what is necessary, but at some point, I think we are bodies that are built to heal.
Mm.
If we
Mm.
constantly
Mm.
are picking at the
Yeah, I
tattoo,
love that metaphor. Like, I'm scratching at what's wrong about you because you're not who I need you to be. Like, itch, itch, itch,
right,
scratch, scratch, scratch. And it's just like actually,
right,
mm,
it becomes counter to what we need to do in order to repair ourselves. I don't want to say fix ourselves, but to repair ourselves in order to be the fullness of, who we can be. So I always feel that we have this fullness of who we can be, and it's constantly evolving. And I think that's the beauty in being human, is that there's no limit to what we can do. But if we're constantly, let's say for an example, let's say we're constantly upset because, the kids, since we're using the school example, the students
mm,
aren't acting well. So I leave work every day, I go to the bar, I drink, and I vent about that. That's like scratching at, you're not doing
mm,
anything to
mm,
help you heal from that. So when there are situations when I'll do presentations for teachers, and they'll say, well, nothing's changing, the kids are acting the same. And I initially go into, well, what can you do? What are you doing for self-care? And their mindset is, I've done everything, which is literally impossible.
yeah, yeah. There's actually like infinite. There's like infinity, and
Right, right. So
there's
it's what is
so many choices that we could make.
exactly. So then it becomes clear to me, what is the block? What is the block? What is the point? What is the place of contention where you're stuck in this place where healing doesn't even seem possible to you? You know what I mean? You just close down the door of possibly healing because you've already set in your mind nothing has changed.
Mm.
So yeah, I guess I'm just saying that to say I think that sometimes we can scratch at the things and affect it, versus putting the ointment to things that can actually repair it and make us even feel better.
Mm. Mm. Gosh, I'm really appreciating that metaphor of kind of like, how can we heal and repair versus when are we actually just making it worse
Right,
and
right.
scratching at it. I'm noticing my mind kind of go in two directions here. So maybe I want to like say briefly, I just want to kind of underline and maybe land on that insight as clearly as we can. And then I want to ask about beauty even more clearly.
Sure, absolutely.
So like if I'm imagining myself, if I'm that teacher who's like, oh, fucking students, like I vent about it. And again, like no shame, like sometimes we need to get stuff off our chest, but if my response is every day to end with, these students are a problem and it's driving me nuts, and I need to fix this. If that's where we end the day, then the students that we are going to see through those eyes the next day we are kind of creating them already. We're sort of saying, this is who you are. And I show up to you. And if I treat you like that's who I think you are, well, what are you getting from me? You're getting a kind of like crotchety, angry, distrustful, sort of low expectations vibe. And so how am I going to meet you? I'm going to start scratching at you, and be like, you're not who I need you to be. You're this like, you like just disrespect me. You don't think I'm anyone. All right. Like, whatever. I'm not going to give you anything. And so
Right.
I can just sort of see like how if we're in that itching the issue state always. We actually are inadvertently co-creating it with the very thing that we're trying to change. Does that resonate with you?
Andy, that is so good. That is so good. And I want to press in on that is so good because, in all of my experience, I've witnessed students. I think there's a chapter I wrote about this, but I've witnessed students that will act the way you treat them. They'll say this kid is up turning up chairs. It's because you've taught them to be that way. So I'll have a student, or I'll know a student in one class that will be turning up chairs in the next class, so attentive.
Mm, mm,
Can't be, it can't be the student. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're an observer, you'll have to say something isn't right here. What is happening differently in your class than in this other class?
Mm.
It's the approach. It's how the teacher sees the student. So that's a very, very powerful thing that we don't realize we have, is what we reflect on people in front of, the way we treat them or believe they are. They're going to show us just that. So it's almost like we don't see it happening in real time, but it's happening in real time.
Yeah. So one of the this feels like an awesome line of inquiry, and maybe we'll go a little bit deeper into like one of the challenges, and this maybe comes back to healing. Let me see what I'm trying to say here. It's like what we just described implicitly is actually a big ask of the adult in this relationship, which in a way is a big ask of anyone in a relationship that's struggling, whatever that is, which is to say, you actually need to see yourself more clearly than you see yourself right now. Because if you really saw yourself without shame or judgment, you would see a person who is angry or unhappy or scared or hurting. If you really looked at yourself, and that's the person that's walking into that classroom, that's the person that's walking into that marriage, that's the person that's walking into that boardroom, is a scared, unhappy, angry person. Now, that's not all of who you are, and you know that. Like, you must know that. So, but you're gonna have to look, and the work of then like looking and choosing a different path or healing so that a different path becomes possible is easier said than done, right? So in a way, implicitly, not only are you seeing the students a certain way through these eyes of fear or anger or frustration, but you're kind of like, that's when you look in the mirror, you're also sort of seeing yourself with those eyes, even if you wouldn't put it in that way, because those are just the eyes you're seeing the world with. So I wonder how does that land with you, and what's the conversation, or what's the moves that you're making with someone that's not like doing the same thing? Well, you need to change, you're the problem now, like, it kind of, there's a move there. Say more about that.
Yeah. I talk about there's 3 stages of fear, and it's denial, rationalization, and then there becomes acceptance. And this has to do with anyone that's struggling with a challenge. It has to do with their level in, and this is the first value of urge, vulnerability. So I bring it back to the teacher. How vulnerable are you being when it comes to letting your students in? Sometimes it's this complex where I'm the teacher and you're the student. If that becomes a complex every time, it's harder for you to see your students on the same level as you, despite the age difference, despite the learning gap or what have you. It turns into a judgment call where I'm better and you're not, so you need to listen to me and what have you. I think, there's a palette, so it's not all one size fits all. But totally, I bring it back to how vulnerable are you being? Because it can start off with denial. Denial is when you will turn up and say, there's something wrong with this kid. I'm not doing anything wrong. And that
I've tried everything I can.
I've tried everything I can. And that denial goes back into a fear.
Hmm.
There's a fear there that you don't want to, and this is how, and I don't want to get too dark, but this is how certain people can um can uh can hate other people
Yeah.
and
By the
think.
way, that like we can go as dark as we need to get. So like, yeah, whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So like even if we talk about um racism, if you think about racism, there are some people today that are in complete denial. They'll continue to think that a specific people group is not worthy, is less than them. Whatever they may come up with, just to deny the fact that there's a fear there.
Mm, mm,
There's a fear there that they don't want to, or they haven't addressed. Not to say that they don't want to, but they're reluctant to because of that fear.
mm,
Fear then leads to what? Hate. Leads to so many other things, but there's denial. Then there comes rationalization. Then you rationalize kind of why you're making those decisions. Well, I had an experience with, a black guy 3 or 4 times, and that's why I don't give them an opportunity, or whatever it may be.
mhm,
And that's rationalizing because there's still a fear. There's still a fear there, but now you're justifying the behavior.
mm.
Denial is there's no. This is just what it is.
There's no
There's
like,
no.
I have no problem. I'm not
I
behaving
don't
it.
know what
Yeah.
you're talking about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we have acceptance. When you accept it, there's still a fear when you accept it, because it's like, I got to do something about this now.
Mm,
So you can accept, and I think that's the closest place to removing the fear. And I think that's where you're being the most vulnerable, is when you accept, okay, there's things I can do differently here. So
mm,
now it's fighting that fear of, hey, but if I do it, my friends are going to probably look at me crazy because this is how I've always been. It's being able to be courageous enough to say, okay, when I fight past this fear and I'm more vulnerable, what is the outcome? What is the benefit? And then being able to realize that the benefit outweighs it, and every benefit from being more vulnerable in these spaces results in healing for yourself, healing for other people. It's creating an opportunity for people to see differently, and you could possibly heal your friends, the people that, there's a long train of that, the ripple effect.
mhm.
So that's kind of what I feel when it comes to a teacher that is struggling with being. I want to bring it back to being vulnerable. I
Yeah.
always go back to, how vulnerable are you actually being with your students? Do they really know you, or
Yeah.
do they know this puppet in front of them that that
Yeah.
they don't really know what's going on, but all
Yeah.
they see
Who is
is
this in a way? Wow, man. This is so like, I'm getting this beautiful image, but what you just said about puppet really like landed me. So I'll respond to that first. Like, if we don't show up as, even if we have a job to do, right? That's not to say that like, yeah, well, I'm a person. I'm just gonna hang out and like we're just chat all year long, and like whatever. We could get into a debate about what good teaching looks like, but yeah, there's a job you have to
right,
do. So we're not. I don't hear you denying that. But if I
right.
show up as a kind of like paper cutout of that job, like, and I put like my fear and my anger, and I'm just like, so the students never actually see a person there.
Right.
They're like, there's this
Right.
like figure up there who, when I do X, they do Y every
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And there is almost a kind of like a puppetry to it. There is a kind of like, the teacher is not actually aware and awake. They're just showing up and reacting.
You become a robot. We're a robot.
Yeah. And the
Just
student sees that. They don't
right.
ever see a person. So like, that's like, whoa, okay. That was, so you using the metaphor of puppet really struck me. But then I'm getting this beautiful image of an alternative, which is like, I could imagine a teacher who's having a tough year. And I'm not saying this would change everything overnight, but I can imagine a teacher going like, all right, everyone, it's middle of the semester. Like, I got to be real with you. I got to sit down. This has been a really hard freaking semester, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
don't know about you all, but it's been really hard for me. Like there's a part of me that like really gets bummed out when we can't talk to each other. And I see myself shouting at you, and I know that's going to make you shout at me or turn off. And I don't know how to do it differently because teaching's hard. Like this is
Mhm.
hard. What do
Right.
you think? How have you been experiencing my classroom? You know, and that like,
Man.
ooh, like that's a kind of move that I think our culture would say, no, like you're supposed to be the person on the top of the hierarchy. You don't show vulnerability. But one of my colleagues recently, actually just like earlier this week, she shared this beautiful kind of insight. As I do a lot of facilitation, so kind of teaching for adults, right?
Okay.
And sometimes there's really clear content we're delivering, but other times it's just about holding space for a
Mm,
group of adults to like have a tough conversation or something. And she
nice.
shared like that the best facilitators, and this is probably also true of the best teachers, both kind of hold their participants in awe, like, look at this, I get to show up for this group of people. And I think this
Mhm.
kind of connects to what you were saying earlier. Like, I really can see and admire this amazing group of people. And like, I'm going to show up for them as best as I can to serve their learning. Well, at the same time, uh, so in a way, you're putting the people above you. Well, at the same
Mhm.
time, putting yourself above the people in the sense of like, I know that I can be in this role of facilitator fully and wholeheartedly, and there's no one else here in this moment who can do what I can do with this group. And in
Right.
that sense, you're letting them be in awe of you. And that
Right.
like there's this kind of a possibility of mutual awe, of mutual admiration, of mutual kind of like sense of wonder that like, isn't this amazing that this group of people could come together at this moment in history and have this conversation? You
Right.
know, and that like kind of both end, as opposed to either I'm above you or you're above me, and I sure as hell can't let you be above me, so I'm going to do everything I can to be above you. And then it's
Mm,
like, there goes the
that's not,
relationship.
yeah, I love that you said that because that already, just the way you said it, sounds inauthentic. It sounds like you're not operating from truly a place of humanity. You're not
Yeah.
operating from a place of knowing that we all have flaws. And if that's the ground you stand on, then of course there's going to be roadblocks that are going to be a lot more difficult to get past than a teacher that's just like, look, I don't know what to tell you guys right now. This is a difficult day. Who has any suggestions on what we can do? Like, there's no shame in that.
Mm, mm,
Sometimes we
mm,
don't have it all together, and I think
mm,
that should be okay. I normalized, and I think this is really, really off um, from being an educator. I could be wrong. Hopefully, anyone that hears this uses this, but I always gravitate toward, and I've tried it one time, and from that time I've tried it, I've always used it. I've always used students to support other students. So what I mean by that is if I realize that there was this goes back to admiring every person that I meet. So I'll see a student that has a lot of influence with other students and he admires me, but there's another student that doesn't really admire me, doesn't know where to admire me, feels like we're not connected. I'll bring in that other student and be like, hey, I wanted you to meet this person. He's really good at making friends, whatever it may be, creating
mm,
that connection. And because that
mm,
student that's so popular admires me, he goes ahead and like is respectful to this other student. Now this
mm,
other student, as a reaction, is now more closer to me and is respectful to me. So we now there's a bigger buy-in to being more kind on the community and sharing that energy with other people. I didn't just write off the student. I didn't just say, oh, you
mm,
know what? You're being rude. That's it.
mm.
So I think being able to use the ability of I may not have all the answers for every student, but
Yeah.
there's somebody that does.
Yeah. Just because I'm not connecting with a student or they're not vibing with me doesn't mean that possibility, it's not possible for that to
Right.
happen. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm,
Absolutely.
mm. Okay. So I feel like we've sketched out this beautiful territory using education as kind of the primary vehicle where we actually through authenticity and vulnerability can heal ourselves and
Mm,
through healing our relationship with others by seeing like, oh, I'm afraid and that fear is making me do dot dot dot. If I can
hmm
actually admit my fear, I'll turns out I'll be less afraid and so will the other person. And then some new possibility emerges, and I'm more healed because I'm not as afraid anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love this territory. Now, I'd love to hear you say, and maybe it's kind of in whatever way you want to speak to this, actually. So I just don't want to try and prescribe anything here, but we started with like beauty is healing.
Mm-hmm.
So and that I think has been working implicitly in our whole conversation, but just to like really speak to, where does beauty show up in the context of what we've been talking about, or alongside we've been talking about, or like, how does beauty, what does that mean to you when you say beauty, and how is it healing for us in the ways that we've been playing with, or beyond the ways we've been playing with?
Well, just to start, we are like you, me, the people on the left, people on the right. We are beauty by definition.
Mm.
So that's something that I've like really coined in my mind a long time ago when I started my brand, my fashion brand. And I coined that because it's not about, I never focused on the pieces that I was making. Like I created like some pullover garments that were very colorful and unique. They were all one of a kind because my mindset was that I wanted to create something for each person that was representative of how our world looks. We are all unique and different. So I wanted to do one-offs where everybody has a different type of look, what have you, and they can choose whatever is they feel resonated with them. So there were different textures, leathers, suedes, some wools, satin, whatever, just many different. I just was really sourcing a lot of different fabrics. And part of me doing that was for people to experience the feeling of beauty when they put it on. Mm. It was never about the piece. It was always about when you wore that, how did you feel when you wore it? Did you feel like you were the fullness of yourself, being confidently who you were? And that was the essence of my whole brand, was for people to see who they are. Mm-hmm. And once you see yourself in beauty, that can transfer in a mighty way that I think we don't recognize as a really, really huge impact. And when I think of beauty, I just think of it as a feeling that we experience, whether it's going out to the beach, right? We go to the beach and we feel a nice cool breeze and we're looking. Some people just do this, right? You just go to the beach and you just look and you're just in it. Mm. And that's beauty. The world wants to create beauty as only things that are marketed to us.
Yes, beauty is something you can buy always.
Right. Right.
Which often doesn't come embedded with that kind of feeling that you're talking about. It can, right. It can, but it often doesn't, because the person selling probably doesn't actually care if you feel beautiful. They just care if you buy the thing that they're selling.
Exactly. And the way I think about it too is like, I feel that we were purposed. We had purpose before we were even conceived. So I feel like we've already had a purpose. We've come into this world with the whole idea of a purpose. I don't feel like anyone is without purpose in this world. Mm-hmm. So I feel like every human here has a purpose. And because we have that purpose, I believe that purpose came before our five senses. So we have five senses. So I believe that the purpose came first, and the five senses only allow us to see that purpose and beauty. So our five senses are meant to complement what is for us. So if we start off by waking up and looking at, whatever they're marketing to us, it's going to seem like, okay, I see a vision, I see a visual that I like, this looks great. But if it's not according to our purpose, we're gonna see things backwards. We're gonna look at that and try to emulate it and realize like, this isn't even fulfilling me. Like I thought this was beauty, but I'm doing it because everybody else is doing it, because we're focusing on our senses versus on the purpose before that. So I hope that makes sense, because I know it's a little bit wonky,
I mean,
but
I'm really digging it. And let me see if I can kind of share what's coming up for me and see if that resonates with you. But like, I'm in touch with this idea that beauty is experiential, that it is experienced, not just seen, that it is like all five senses experience. You feel it in your body.
right.
And you use the word kind of fulfilling, and I like really want to lean into that word. There's a sense when we feel full, filled up, we feel more of life. We
Right.
feel like sort
Right.
of like we can both feel that paradoxically, like we're just one little like sort of mote of light in this vast, huge universe, and also that like the whole universe is right there with us. Like somehow
Right.
that's like, and that's a full feeling. That's fulfilling.
Right.
But there's a
Right.
quality in which if you don't feel that in you, then by extension it must be out there somewhere. And suddenly out there somewhere are all of these like pretty seductive examples of like, oh, there's that person is beautiful, like I am attracted to that person and they're wearing that thing or doing that thing, like I better go do that. So our senses can kind of be seduced by beauty that's not actually ours to embody.
Right.
And I imagine there's no like easy rule of thumb about how to tell a difference. Like this is the work of a lifetime, but maybe one clue is if like you're chasing something, and when you get it, if when the high wears off, do you feel fuller or emptier? Then
Right.
maybe that's a clue that you're not actually in pursuit of your specific beauty, but you're just in pursuit of someone else's definition of beauty, and that's kind of leading you away from that fullness. How's that
Right.
landing with you?
Right. No, I totally resonate with exactly what you said. It's like having it's like having a it's like a rhythm. So I feel like it's like there's a rhythm, not only a rhythm that is singular to you or singular to me, but there's a rhythm I think of this world. And that rhythm is a feeling. So based on what we see outside, and the rhythm is based on growth. So we see plants, we see flowers, we see animals, we see ourselves, we all grow. Everything is about growth. Everything is about growth. And there's a rhythm to growth. There's always a rhythm to growth. And I think even in a rhythm of growth, there's beauty in that. So if we see like an image, I think it's going back to, is there a rhythm to this, or am I just doing this because somebody else said I should do it? Because I don't feel like you'll get that feeling of beauty when it comes to, oh, I'm doing this because, it's just, if I keep pursuing this type of look, then people are going to like me. That's not a real rhythm. That's more so of either an insecurity or more so of an opportunity to try to get people to like something that you may not feel organically, but you're doing it because of the idea of, this is what the world says is beauty. This is what the world says is what I should like. So now there's this false sense of what actually is beautiful to you because you're only going off of your senses and not like that deeper purpose aspect of it.
Yeah. Yeah, like no one has to tell the flower to grow towards the sun.
Right.
Like, and so the one of the kind of cool things about being human is we have a lot of influence over each other. We can make all sorts of shit up and do some cool stuff, but there's something about which is maybe part of the your work and what we're digging into right now. There's something about, I don't know, let me think of an example. Like if you go to a museum, you can just kind of go through the museum and like see all the cool stuff, and it's a pretty cool experience. Like just the fact that someone has taken the time to, a group of people have taken time to kind of curate an experience.
Right.
And that, like, just being in the museum can be pretty cool. But if you're really in the museum, you can just, every so often, if you just like go to the museum and actually watch people, you can actually see people having an experience with a specific piece of art.
Yes.
And there's a kind of like you might go to that art and be like, yeah, this is cool. I'm not sure why they're like almost on the edge of tears or like joy, but like
Right.
something's happening there that is deeper than just the seeing the art. There's an experience there.
Right.
And no one has to tell that person to have that experience. In fact, no one could tell that person to have that experience. There's 1,000 pieces of beautiful art in that museum, and boom, that one just like lands in them
They feel
and feel
it.
it. Yeah. And so you could kind of, by extension, bring that out to all of life, right?
Right.
Like there's lots of beautiful places in the world,
Hmm.
but we can't ever see them all. And we're not called to see them all. There's some way
Right.
in which, if we have the privilege of being able to go somewhere or be somewhere, some places feel like home. Some
Right.
places feel like divine or sacred.
Hmm.
And some places are cool, but they're just not your place. And it's sort of like people, that's true with people and with work and with, there's almost
Right.
like you could really
Right.
pick anything that we have in life and realize that there are certain things that will fill you, that will resonate with you, that will make you
Right.
stop and go, this is mine. And because
Right.
it's mine, I want to give more. I want to be more. I want to do more.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that goes into what I was sharing about. We had purpose before we had these senses, because purpose
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean we're all doing the exact same thing. It just means that we are now equipped with the ability to experience beauty based on what's within us. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
mm,
So
mm,
it's like,
mm-hmm.
it's super, you're having me go a little deeper, and I love this because I didn't even think about it to that degree, where we all have a specific thing, maybe more than one. Some may be gifted with more than one specific thing, but we all have at least one purpose. That purpose can be to be a great father, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say it all has to be based on status and trying to go up the chain. It can be being a great father to your children.
Mm.
And there's beauty in that, by the way you experience your children, and how you teach them, and you take care of them. There's beauty, and I guarantee that father is feeling beauty every day when their kid has a conversation with them, and they're like, man, damn, I just feel this. This is
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
changed this for the world. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
mm,
So
mm,
it all
mm-hmm.
comes from this place of seeing, I think, seeing it in the order of that purpose allows this father to experience beauty in that way. If he operated first from, well, most fathers, they have a six-figure job, they provide differently for their kids. If you're thinking outwardly first, you may miss that experience of beauty with your kids, because
Mm.
you're trying to operate backwards from that place. So yeah.
Yeah, man. And that, like, to maybe circle back to weave this into what I'm in touch with a kind of education as an example, but really in a way, I feel like we're sketching out a possible aspirational hope for like human civilization. Like I'll just go that big, but
Right,
even just take one
right.
school. You could build a school designed to make sure everyone learns the same thing. And
Mhm.
that's a bit of a simplification, but we could argue that public education is kind of like often set up that way. This kind of like factory model.
Right.
And the subset of kids who at the very least are competent or excellent, or maybe even thrive, because for them their purpose, their kind of the way they're made and meets that model and it really works for them,
Mhm.
cool. But
Mhm.
for all the other kids where that doesn't work, and also, by the way, for all the other teachers and administrators where that doesn't work, there's
Right.
a real tragedy there. And that for probably a majority of the human beings inside that institution who are doing their best to make the institution work the way they've been told to, are creating a place where most people don't get in touch with like what's their beauty, what's their purpose, what's the thing that like just when they like click with it, there's no denying it, and that's a beautiful thing to watch when you see someone else in their beauty, when you see someone else in their purpose. It's just like it's magic,
Right. Right.
kind of magic,
Absolutely.
right? And so imagine just at the level of one school where you're, and I know you've imagined this because you write about it and you've worked to foster it, but where you walk through the halls and you feel, I mean, I'm even getting a bodily sensation right now, like kind of tingly, like, yeah, like this place is different. This is a
Yeah.
place that like I would want to send my kid to. This place is alive.
Right.
Then we could just like sketch that out. What if we lived in a country that actually attempted to do that for every single
Oh,
person who's
man.
a citizen of that country? What would that, like, oh my God, that's where I want to live.
Sounds like we got to build a country, man.
I know, right? But maybe this connects to, I know we're coming down the home stretch, but maybe we could land with, like, you shared with me this beautiful experience of going to Nigeria, where where your family is from and your ancestors are from,
Yeah.
and how you kind of went with a little bit of a two-dimensional kind of story of what you were going to experience and what you actually experienced. And maybe could you
Right.
just share about that? Because that was really, when you share that with me, it was beautiful, particularly the kind of some of the elements that as an American man were
Right.
quite sort of surprising and shocking, but also ultimately joyful and beautiful.
Right. Yeah. I naturally had reservations about traveling back home to Nigeria because it was my first time. Haven't experienced it, but being in the States, being a first generation Nigerian American, um, I was a little shaken. I wasn't sure what I would experience, what the media portrayed. It's a third world country, and it's
Oh, that
like,
phrase, they're like, oh, just
right. And I'm
plants
like,
this seed of like worry, and this is dangerous,
exactly.
and this is less than, and it's that whole hierarchy thing
Exactly.
again.
Exactly. The whole idea of just the language around it, right? So for me, there was all these thoughts around it. And as soon as I landed on the ground in Nigeria, all of that, it just fell away from me because what I seen, what I experienced was so different than everything, everything that I was thinking. It was so opposite of that. I seen beautiful trees, beautiful people. Um, a lot of, everyone was friendly. I
Mm,
seen really a familial vibe. I didn't see
mm,
any type of fear.
mm,
And going into a place where you haven't been and you feel like, wow, this is actually really great. It's something I would have never imagined if I didn't take that opportunity to have that experience. I could have landed on my fears, right? And said, no, I'm not going. And
mm,
that's the thing about
mm,
fear, and uh I define vulnerability of and I chose to be vulnerable in that state, but I choose, I define vulnerability as the possibility of getting hurt, but if there's a possibility that you can get hurt, that means that there's still an equal possibility that you will find something else out of that situation.
mm, mm,
So we always lean on the side of there's a possibility that we can get harmed.
mm,
We never focus on what is that other possibility though. There's a possibility we can learn something. There's a possibility we can be highly enlightened. There's a possibility that we can grow in a way. And that's why I love the idea of vulnerability based on that, knowing that, yes, there's a possibility that you can be hurt, but there's also an equal possibility of something even greater happening if we step out in that. So
mm,
I'm
mm,
glad I did that with that experience back home, and even realizing the difference between how comfortable people were with uh things that socially are unacceptable. Like there was a guy on the bus and you know he let one rip. So he farted and I'm the only one on the bus looking around like, hey, did you guys hear that? Did you guys? And everyone's head forward, just focused like nothing happened.
yeah,
And to me, there was a beauty in that because they didn't focus on the minor things. Like they know that gas passes the system. So it's
yeah,
like,
yeah. Like literally every single like creature on the planet, every single person on the planet, the biggest name CEO or politician or whatever,
right,
like celebrity, like they're ripping farts.
right,
So like,
right,
what if we lived in a world where like we didn't have to like manage each other so much to not be quote unquote so gross, right? Like that's like, all right,
right.
yeah, fart doesn't smell great, but like it ain't gonna kill you. So like let's,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And
mm,
even to experience that is like, man, I wouldn't be able to see that happening in the US where someone wouldn't turn their nose up at you, say, hey, that's rude, or what have you. And it's like, we've created these structures that make us anxious, make us like, make us act in ways that create a unsurety of who we are. You know what I mean? So I think it was really important to see that for me to say, wow, like this is normal. Like
mm.
it should be normal. It could be normal. And you know, of course, we live in a society where it's not normal. But it was great to see that, just to know
Yeah.
that this is happening in places. People are just living and enjoying life. And I think I shared with you earlier, there was a sense of joy. Even seeing my cousins, two male cousins, holding hands. There was
Mm,
a joy in
mm,
seeing that.
mm.
And there was a joy because naturally I would think immediately, oh my gosh, they must be homosexual. And I had to say, why did I even think that? Like
Yeah.
I could physically see them, their cousins, I could see them enjoying each other.
Mm,
And our
mm.
society has caused us to see enjoying each other, like holding hands and being close, as, oh no, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
It's
know,
really like, mm. Yeah, it makes me kind of sad just to think about like how much we have create like here in the States, we've created a culture that is incredibly prescriptive
yeah,
about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and who's okay and who's not okay. And like it cuts us off from these really simple, basic human, like, like it just to like, just if you have kids, like, well,
right.
this one of the best things you can do as a parent of a young child is just like hold them. Like that's it. You don't have to like,
Right.
there's no magic. It's just you just hold them. And
It's not even a thought, right?
yeah, you just hold them. And it's like actually we as adults to be held by people we trust and love is incredibly joyful and gracious. And it's like, why do we have to hide that? Like
Right.
when I was in my 20s, I had a roommate from Brazil, and I still am in touch with him, and he's such a beautiful, beautiful dude and a beautiful soul. And we were like roommates, and then he was moving back to Brazil. And so we were like hanging out every day. We just were such simpatico, like in terms of our love of adventure and experience.
Nice.
And he's like a brother to me. And then when he was leaving, he just was like, I'm sad. And I'm going to tell you, like, I'm going to miss you. And he's hugging me and he's crying. And at the time, like I'd never interacted with another guy like that. And I would like, I froze. And that's one of my greatest regrets. I mean, I've talked to him about it. It's like, I feel really sad that in that moment, I couldn't like tell you that I felt exactly the same way because I was so
Wow.
uncomfortable by that. And like,
Yeah.
that sucks,
Mm.
but like, there it was. I had that belief that I had inherited that somehow this was risky or dangerous or wrong.
Wow. Wow. No, absolutely. And it helped me with unpacking unpacking what I see, and as far as like focusing on, and these are to me would be considered like focusing on the minors. Like we tend to in our society is focusing on the minors. Like to me, focusing on why two people are holding hands is a minor. It's like why like
Mm,
why?
mm, mm,
Like,
mm,
if there's joy, if there's happiness there, who am I to judge and say and feel any sort of way about that? If, their happiness is bringing more joy around them, or it could
mm,
be. And I think
mm.
it all boils down to the fear of,
There's fear again.
they might infringe on me, they might. So it's like, no, that doesn't mean that.
Mm, mm,
But
mm,
to create things that you're building houses that house your fear, so that it can't happen not only for you but for anything that is like that, because
mm,
of whether it's
mm,
power, whatever you may have, that creates these structures now for other people. And now we think, me as an American, now I think that my cousins are acting kind of weird because they're holding hands, right? It's like,
yeah, it's sad. Yeah,
it's
it's
really
really like
sad.
it twists us in all sorts of knots.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Right.
Ob, this is we're kind of coming to the close here, sadly, but I'm really feeling a lot of like energy and joy being with you, and like definitely want to make sure that people know where they can find your book and all that stuff. We'll share that, all that good stuff. But before we close with that, I'd love to hear like just what are you present to now, or what do you want to what do you want to close with? What are you feeling kind of in this moment that you'd want to share with anyone who might hear this?
Um, I want to share, and hopefully this isn't long-winded. I know
That's
we're
all right. Whatever.
so I want to share
Let it be as windy as it needs to be.
okay. I want to share an experience I had recently that um led to a greater discovery of my brand and my coaching brand and a framework. And I guess I want to lead with just saying how important it is to show up for other people, even when you don't know there's a message or something in it for you. You know, like I had a friend recently that she was also, I think she was like a school social worker, and she's gotten into a bit of some situations where she's been hospitalized for, like, she's been in mental
Mm.
institutions. And it happened to her a couple years, maybe a year ago, during the height of the pandemic. And I felt honored that she actually called me or had me on her list. And the clinician at the time called me and asked if she's okay. And I've done a lot of work with her. And I'm like, yeah, she's okay. She's been doing a lot of great work, what have you. That first time I didn't have an experience to talk to her about kind of what she was going through. And I really wanted to, just because I'm not really in that space, but because I know her, I wanted to know kind of what she was going through. And it happened again recently. And I wasn't able um, to be there for that experience. But afterwards, she gave me a call and she said, she's like, I just got out of this institution. And I'm like, I kind of want to ask you about it. And she was like, that's perfectly fine. And that invitation was really, really powerful for me, because it allowed me to ask what her mindset was, what was happening in the moment. And I think a lot of it boiled down to being unbalanced. And sometimes when we're unbalanced, we don't operate from the core of who we are. And I learned that through asking her just a series of questions where I started off by letting her know the truth, which is, whenever I speak to you, you're always balanced, you're always kind, you're always respectful. And you shared that in your situation, why they took you for being manic was because you were yelling at your family, you were acting erratic. And I just briefly spoke to her about, what do you think that was? I was like, so when you speak to me, you're balanced. So I said, what are your pillars? What are the core things that center you and anchor you when you think about our interaction? And she gave me 4 things. And one was gracious. There were 2 other ones I can't remember. And then one was courage. And this experience taught me that we all have 4 pillars. We all have 4 values, or probably even more, but we can boil it down to 4 character traits that ground us and center us. And her 4, when she was operating in all 4 of them, that's the experience I've received from her. But when she decided to operate from only one of them, or only like 2 or 3 of them, that's when she became unbalanced or imbalanced and acted differently. And I realized that through asking her these questions. And when I thought about it, she was leaning so heavily on courage. And sometimes when we lean on one or the other, it doesn't mean that courage is a bad thing. But when we lean so heavily on one thing, it may come out differently than what we think. So her being so, she's an intellectual, so being so intelligent in working with kids and what have you, she took this opportunity to let her family know, like, you guys don't know what I know. Like, I'm, I went to school for this, what have you. And it came off as being angry, even though for her, it was an opportunity for her to advocate for herself. So her not every day waking up and advocating for herself when it comes to her family turned into a moment where she's like, no, I need to protect myself.
Mm,
But it came off so strong. And it was only because she was leaning on that. She didn't lean on being gracious. She didn't lean on the other two that she had. And if she would have, I guarantee you she wouldn't have been in that position. So it taught me a lot. And I didn't realize in the moment, me just asking her these questions led to this framework that I now use for other people, for everyone, just to recognize what our anchors are, because it may be a matter of us leaning too heavily on one or two or
mm,
three
mm,
and not one that keeps us centered. And it really changed my life because I didn't see I wouldn't normally I don't ask questions like that. I'll just I'll just be there to support. And I'm glad I did in that moment because it gave me something that I can use to support other people in healing. And I'm just gracious for that moment. I'm very, very thankful for that moment and for her feeling comfortable enough to open up to me. So I just want to share with everyone that it's the challenges we may have may just be an imbalance.
mm,
And with that imbalance, it doesn't mean that we're finished. It just means in the moment we were leaning too heavily on something that we felt we needed to protect ourselves in the
mm,
moment.
mm,
It's getting back to that place where we're identifying what are the four core, what are the things that I need to stand on and stay centered in, so that I'm not operating based on the external stimuli, the people
mm,
around me that are pushing me in one area or the other.
mm. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Are you aware and comfortable? Are you aware of and comfortable sharing what your four pillars are, or at least what you sense
Wow.
them to be?
Yeah, yeah. So part of even the pillars, and one beautiful thing about that is we all have different character traits and values. But what I hone in on is what is that definition for you? So not the book definition, but what are the four pillars and what is the definition for you? So for
Mm-hmm.
me, mine is responsibility, peaceful, self-discipline, and reflective.
Mm,
Um, but even with those four, it's like, what does responsibility mean to you when you say it? Like for me, it's I'm just reliable and people can can trust my words. People know that things are going to get done. I do my best to help when I can. And if it is a part of my responsibility to lead and support others, I'll go ahead and do that. So it's like that's my definition of
mm,
responsibility. So
mm,
anytime I read all four of those, I say, what am I lacking? You know? Um,
mm,
and it gets deeper where it's like, well, how do I operate when I'm not in each pillar, right? What do I look like when
mm,
I'm not peaceful? What do I look like when I'm not responsible?
mm,
So
mm.
those are my four, and they help me stay grounded, and hopefully it can continue to be used as a tool for other people to also feel grounded and get back to that place of balance.
Dude, wow. That feels like an awesome place for us to close. I hope that anyone hears this, it takes you that as an invitation to just at least begin to get in touch with what they anchor in, what their pillars are,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
to do so in a way that honors that we're not always going to be balanced perfectly with all of those pillars, but
Right,
that like that's an aspiration and a possibility that we can all move towards.
right.
Mm,
It's the idea of having it on your mind. Doesn't mean
mm,
we're going to be perfect, but if you have it on your mind, you can think in that moment, what am I lacking here? Like even after a situation, like, was I missing anything in a situation that caused me to act in a way that I know I don't feel balanced? Because we know when we don't feel balanced, but what are we lacking in this moment? Like, what pillars were lacking, or what was I leaning too heavily on
mm,
that
mm,
caused me to
mm,
act this way?
mm.
So the goal
Yeah.
is eventually we become a master in ourselves in those areas. So
Mm. Awesome. Well, OB, if people want to find your book Verge, or they want to find out more about your fashion brand or your work, where should they go check this stuff out?
yeah, you can go to wakeupthesoul.com, and that's wake up the soul.com. And as far as my book, you can get it on my website, but you can also get it on Amazon. I only have the ebook on Amazon and the audiobook.
Did you read the audiobook?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, that's cool. Nice. That must have been fun.
So you guys will get to hear the same voice if you.
I
But
think
yeah,
that's a
it
good
was actually
selling
really
point.
cool.
Yeah.
It was cool, but it was demanding. I
Mm,
didn't realize how much work it took.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to share all that stuff in the show notes, and just like thank you for this beautiful healing conversation. It really was meant a lot to me, and I trust that other people will hear that, will have some kind of felt sense of what it means to show up in their lives with this kind of anchoring, this balance, this commitment to acceptance, to vulnerability that you model and that you share. This is great, man.
Thank you. No, I appreciate this space you've created for me, for everybody to listen in. So fight on, man. I appreciate this work and I'm
Mm,
grateful for this
mm,
opportunity.
mm. Thanks, man.